When you think of Japan, what comes to mind? Perhaps enchanting temples, cherry blossoms, and cities that look like they're straight out of a futuristic movie. A country where perfection seems to be in every detail, be it technology or cultural discipline. But is it like that for everyone? Hidden behind the neon lights of Tokyo and the impeccable efficiency of large corporations, there is a Japan that is almost never shown. A side where poverty is real, where entire neighborhoods live on the margins of society, and where thousands of people struggle daily to survive. Did you know that elderly people in Japan are committing petty crimes in order to get arrested and get something to eat and sleep on? Today, we're going to reveal what the tourist guides don't show you and the devastating impact of inequality in one of the richest countries in the world. Number 1. Location and geographical data. Japan is one of those places that mixes everything up in a unique way. On the one hand, you have futuristic cities full of skyscrapers and neon signs. On the other, ancient temples surrounded by cherry blossom trees and landscapes that look like they're straight out of a painting. Made up of more than 6,000 islands, Japan concentrates its energy in 4 main ones: Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku. And it's amazing how it manages to be so compact yet so diverse. One day you're traversing the crowded streets of Tokyo, and the next you could be climbing Mount Fuji or relaxing in a traditional onsen, the hot springs that are a true refuge. The mix of tradition and modernity is fascinating. One moment you're in a tech district like Akihabara, surrounded by robots and game stores. The next, you could be in Kyoto, walking through temples and bamboo forests with the tranquility of someone who has stepped back in time. And you can't forget the seasons, which transform the landscape as if the country were changing its face every few months. It's exactly this contrast that makes the country so special, full of contrasts and experiences you won't find anywhere else in the world. Number 2. History. Japan's history is a plot full of twists and turns, combining ancient tradition with radical transformations. Known today for its advanced technology and fascinating culture, Japan has a history marked by conquests, isolation, and rebirth. For centuries, the country lived under the rule of the samurai and the shogunate system, a period in which war and discipline shaped its identity. It wasn't until the 19th century, during the Meiji Restoration, that Japan opened its doors to the world, modernizing at an impressive rate, which even took the country from a feudal society to an industrial powerhouse in a matter of decades. But success seems to have gone to their heads, and the pursuit of power at all costs took its toll. During the Second World War, Japan engaged in an aggressive military expansion, which culminated in the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by atomic bombs in 1945. This was a turning point. With the surrender, Japan had to rebuild from scratch. In the post-war period, Japan adopted a new constitution with a focus on peace and economic development. And it worked. In just a few decades, it became one of the world's largest economies, dominating industries such as electronics and automobiles. But, as there are 2 sides to every story, the gloss of modernity hides a lesser-known reality. And just a warning, we know that any country faces challenges, and our aim here is not to belittle Japan, but to show the other side of the coin with respect and clarity. Just as we did in the video on South Korea, where we showed a reality unknown to many. Did you know, for example, that in South Korea there are elderly women who resort to prostitution in order to survive? This sad reality and much more can be found in the full documentary, The Dark Side of South Korea, which is not to be missed, so be sure to go and check it out. Now, returning to Japan, we begin with a social problem that has caught the world's attention: the falling number of babies and the accelerating aging of the population. Number 3. Birth rate and aging population. In a place where technology and tradition coexist, it would be easy to imagine a perfect balance. But when it comes to demographics, things take a different turn. The birth rate is so low that some cities are practically disappearing, while the elderly population is growing at an impressive rate. Believe it or not, there are now more diapers sold to the elderly than to babies there. And it's no exaggeration to say that this is already transforming the country's landscape. In Ichinono, for example, the birth of a child was recently treated as a historic event. After all, it had not happened for 20 years. Meanwhile, to cope with the silence of the streets, residents have come up with a curious solution: life-size dolls that live the daily life of the city. They are everywhere, swinging on seesaws, pushing carts, or simply greeting the rare visitors. But this demographic crisis isn't just affecting life in the cities. It has profound consequences for the economy. With fewer and fewer young people to support the welfare system, the burden falls on the elderly, who are finding it increasingly difficult to live with dignity, and we'll talk more about them in a moment. Because first, let's take a look at the reasons that are affecting the birth rate, and believe it or not, one of the reasons is that young people are following celibacy. Number 4. Lack of sexual interest. The low birth rate in Japan has several explanations, but what lies behind this reality goes far beyond the cost of living or the difficulty of balancing work and family. As much as the government offers generous benefits to stimulate the birth rate, such as subsidies and tax incentives, the truth is that the root of the problem lies in a tangle of social issues ranging from shyness to a disconnection from traditional relationships. For many young people, especially men, interest in real relationships is waning. The phenomenon is so common that it even has a name: Sekusu Shinai Shokogun, or celibacy syndrome. According to a study by the Japan Family Planning Association, around 25% of men between the ages of 16 and 24 said they despise sexual contact, a scenario that may seem strange to outsiders. Many men prefer to marry anime characters or immerse themselves in virtual worlds in search of human connections. In an even more surprising example, some frequent establishments where, instead of seeking intimate relations, they pay to rest their head on a woman's lap, just to talk to someone face-to-face and have real contact. With this lack of emotional and physical connection, it's no wonder that birth rates are so low. This phenomenon, combined with a life expectancy that is one of the highest in the world, has created a population where more than 28% of people are 65 or older. Number 5. Poverty. When people talk about Japan, the first image that comes to mind is of a strong economy, cutting-edge technology, and an organized country where everything works. And that's no lie. With an almost non-existent unemployment rate and a minimum wage that reaches $1,000, many people think that there is only prosperity there. But the truth is quite different. Behind this facade, more than 20 million people live below the poverty line, according to the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. This means that around 16% of the population is struggling to cover basic needs such as food and housing. And those who suffer the most are single mothers and the elderly. For single mothers, especially those who have children still at school, the reality is cruel. Many end up in temporary or part-time jobs with very low salaries while trying to raise their children alone. And the government, despite being efficient in many areas, doesn't offer enough support to ease this burden. And what about the elderly? Well, their situation isn't easy either. The basic pension is so low that many have to continue working, even at an advanced age. And we're not talking about light work, but heavy jobs that they can barely do. There are even elderly people committing petty crimes just to get arrested, because in jail they are guaranteed food, shelter, and medical care. In the past, children took care of their parents, but with the migration of young people to the big cities, many elderly people have been left behind in rural regions without support. And the problem goes further. A recent survey revealed that almost 60% of Japanese families say they struggle to afford food, clothing, or a place to live. Number 6. Homelessness. One of the consequences of this poverty, for example, is the homeless. Yes, they do exist in Japan. In the post-war period, when many Japanese struggled to secure food and shelter in an economically devastated country, poverty was alleviated as the Japanese economy got back on track. Shortly afterwards, in the 1970s, there was a strong feeling among many Japanese that they were living in a more egalitarian country, where everyone belonged to the middle class. However, the gulf between classes opened up again. In the 1990s, after the collapse of the economic bubble, Japan saw its stability crumble. Companies began to abandon lifetime employment, and the streets of major cities began to fill up with homeless people. A scenario that seemed unthinkable decades before, when the country boasted the title of middle-class nation. Today, in Tokyo alone, it is estimated that around 1,700 people have nowhere to live. But that number is just the tip of the iceberg. Many don't appear in the statistics because the government avoids highlighting the seriousness of the problem by moving the homeless away from public areas. Homelessness in Japan comes in two forms. The most visible is in large train stations and parks, where makeshift tents and shacks appear at night and disappear at dawn. These people often have to queue to get soup or a piece of bread. But there is also the invisible face of this reality. Many homeless people sleep in capsule hotels, LAN houses, or even fast food restaurants that are open 24 hours a day. It's a hidden poverty that goes unnoticed by those who only look at the surface. What's more, almost every major Japanese city has a place called a doyagai, a play on words from the term yado or inn. Despite their pretty name, in practice they are urban slums. Number 7. Kamagasaki slum. It's hard to imagine that in a country as advanced as Japan, there are slums, but they are there, albeit out of the spotlight. The best known is Kamagasaki in Osaka, an area where around 25,000 people live in precarious conditions. The neighborhood, which officially no longer appears on maps, is an open wound that the city prefers to ignore. Kamagasaki is far from the modern, neon-lit image we usually associate with Japanese cities. It stands in the shadow of the Abenobashi, the tallest building in the country, which seems to watch its residents with indifference. For many, it is the last refuge, a destination for those looking for work, even if only for a day, or some kind of government assistance. The nerve center of the neighborhood is the Aran Labor and Welfare Center, a place that should bring hope, but in practice only amplifies despair. It is there that men, most of them elderly, sit with their few belongings, waiting patiently for an opportunity. They have no choice but to wait, day after day, for something that rarely comes. Another emblematic spot is Sankaku Park, a small triangular area surrounded by cheap lodgings. The park has a communal TV that is only on briefly in the morning and evening, almost like a social control. Apart from that, the only escape many find is in alcohol or even more dangerous vices. But in the midst of all this precariousness, Kamagasaki retains a sense of community that is rare in Japan's big cities. There, people still find time to talk, smile, and help each other, something that breaks down the personal barriers so common in the rest of the country. But she's not the only one. Number 8. Sanya. Sanya in Tokyo is another of those areas that Japan prefers to hide. Officially, the neighborhood no longer exists on maps, but it's still there, carrying a dark history and problems that continue to this day. Sanya's main junction is called the Bridge of Tears, a name that refers to the area's painful past. It was there that relatives said goodbye to those condemned to death before their executions. During the same period, the district was also home to the Burakumin, a marginalized caste who performed work considered impure, such as slaughtering animals and processing leather. In modern times, Sanya has become home to day laborers. These men, who literally helped build the Tokyo we know today, never received the recognition they deserved. Now, many of them are aging, living on minimal pensions, and facing a harsh reality as homeless or poor people on the margins of society. And you know what's funniest about all this? Many Japanese are barely aware of the existence of doyagai like Kamagasaki and Sanya. For many Japanese, places like these are almost taboo. Those who know of their existence associate these areas with the bottom of the barrel, where the country's inequalities are most visible. And for those who don't know, these neighborhoods remain hidden, far from the glitz and glamour that Japan usually shows the world. And so we end another journey, this time through the hidden slums and little-known stories of Japan. Now we want to know, what caught your attention the most? Was it the harsh reality of Kamagasaki, or the dark history of Sanya, which still bears the scars of the past? Leave a comment and share your impressions with us. If you like discovering unexpected sides and stories that few people know about, keep following our Bello Mundo. We still have many incredible destinations and surprising curiosities to explore together. Thank you for being with us so far, and we look forward to seeing you on your next adventure. See you soon.